I think that the last time Harry was here and he saw his father for 54 minutes over a cup of tea.
Because it's not just where the rumors of possible use of a surrogate were born. It's
crazed wife using the children, Archie and Lilibet, as props on
guys between the Duchess and Netflix before the partnership quietly unraveled. Insiders are now claiming
8-year anniversary that's coming up on May 19. One insider familiar with the discussions told Radar Online
of desperation, the kind of tacky act we expect of a C-list venal celebrity. Rather,
Archie and Lily. Well, the reason why is because the couple are completely desperate. Meghan's entrepreneur
stretching themselves, that they've gone rogue, they're rewriting the terms of Megxit. What direction do you think?
Action to pay her and Prince Harry's huge bills because money is tight. Now, I mean,
I think she could do with a tax break. I think we could all do it with a break from Meghan Markle, to be quite frank. But she's the everyday.
For endless media speculations, Meghan and Harry have long been showing signs of their possible separation from the monarchy. Do you remember?
Plenty of Prince Harry mentions, but the 40-year-old royal doesn't ever appear on screen. Something he did while,
like those of Prince William and Princess Catherine's children, followed a very clear pattern. Now, it was slightly...
Then you've got Archie from this angle. You know, you think, well, sooner or later, you know, it's just by
you can have your brand. We don't want anything to do with it, even though we were involved in it and invested in it and want to make money. We don't think...
Stop the financial rot. And so began Harry's clumsy campaign to curry favour with his faraway...
The elite. This is part of the reason why so many of us hate them, because they don't deserve any of this. They don't. Their
arms are unnaturally skinny. And I've seen a whole load of this, which makes it clear that these pictures were
jewelry. I wouldn't have paid any more than 83 grand for that one. Thanks for joining us. Good luck with your budgeting.
Everyone thought they understood this story. Two people exhausted by royal life, choosing to walk away, choosing peace, choosing privacy. And for a while, that's exactly what it looked like. A clean break, a fresh start, a couple trading palace walls for California sunshine. But the cleaner a story looks on the surface, the messier it usually is underneath, because the more people started casually but really paying attention, the more things stopped adding up. Timelines that don't match, records that should exist but apparently don't, a lifestyle that costs far more than it publicly earns, and a silence around certain questions that, instead of killing the conversation, keeps making it louder. This isn't coming from gossip accounts or random corners of the internet. The people asking these questions have spent years investigating powerful figures and what they found when they turned their focus to Harry. And Meghan wasn't just drama. It was a pattern, a very carefully managed pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So let's start at the beginning, because that's where the first crack appeared. Tom Bower isn't the kind of person you dismiss easily. He's not a tabloid writer chasing clicks or a blogger throwing opinions into the void. He's an investigative author who has spent decades building cases against some of the most powerful people in the world.
Investigative journalist and author Tom Bower, best known for his unauthorized biographies, including the recently re-released...
He doesn't speculate for sport. He digs, he documents, and he builds arguments that are hard to knock down. So when he turned his attention toward Harry and Meghan, the people who follow this world closely didn't laugh it off. They leaned in. What caught his attention wasn't the Netflix specials, it wasn't the book, it wasn't even the very public falling out with the royal family. It was something quieter and more consistent than any of that. It was the management. The way every single piece of their story, from the timing of announcements to the framing of sit-down interviews, felt carefully constructed. Not organic, not spontaneous, deliberately engineered. And once you start seeing it that way, it's very difficult to stop. The more he pulled at that thread, the more it led back to one specific moment, one event that should have been the most joyful and straightforward thing in the world, the birth of their first child. Because that's where the pattern reportedly became impossible to ignore. Here's what actually happened. The palace announced to the public that Meghan had gone into labor in the afternoon. Big moment. People were watching, waiting, excited, and then just hours later, it came out that Archie had already been born. Not in the afternoon, but that morning, hours earlier. We're talking about an 8-hour gap between what was communicated publicly and what had already taken place behind closed doors. Now, on the surface, you might want to give that the benefit of the doubt. Miscommunications happen, timelines get muddled in the chaos of a birth. But this wasn't a casual social media update.
He had his first audience with the Queen. The picture released on the couple's Instagram as well.
This was an official palace announcement about a royal birth. The kind of statement that goes through multiple layers of review before it ever reaches the public. Every word in those announcements is chosen deliberately. So when the timeline turned out to be off by 8 hours, it raised a question that was hard to brush aside. Was that gap genuinely a mistake, or was it a decision? That's the thing about Bauer's approach. He doesn't tell you what to think. He just lines up the details and asks you to look at them honestly. And when you do, the birth announcement starts feeling less like a miscommunication and more like the first visible sign of something that would become a recurring theme, controlling what the public knows, and more importantly, when they know it. For most families, that kind of thing wouldn't matter. But Harry and Meghan aren't most families. They're connected to one of the most documented institutions in the world. And in that world, the details around a birth aren't just sentimental. They're official. They're recorded. They carry legal weight, which means that 8-hour gap wasn't just confusing. To the people paying close attention, it was a signal. And what came next made that signal even harder to ignore. To understand why that 8-hour gap matters beyond just optics, you have to understand what a royal birth actually involves. Because it's nothing like a regular birth announcement. It's not a family decision about when to post on social media.
Showed off their son and future king for the very first time.
It's a formal, documented process with moving parts that most people never think about. There are official doctors involved, there are signatures, there are records created specifically to verify that everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. And the reason all of that structure exists isn't tradition for tradition's sake. It's because a royal birth is directly tied to the line of succession. Who inherits, who is recognized, who holds a legitimate claim, all of it traces back to documented proof of how and where a child entered the world. The paperwork isn't a formality, it's the foundation. So when that process isn't visible, when the usual transparency isn't there, it doesn't just raise eyebrows among royal watchers. It creates what some have described as a structural gap. And with Archie's birth, reportedly, a lot of that normal documentation process simply wasn't on display in the way people expected it to be. That's where something called the witness of the body rule enters the conversation. It sounds like something out of a history book, and in many ways it is, but it remains relevant in royal and legal terms even today. The basic principle is straightforward. To be recognized as eligible within the line of succession, a child must be physically born by the mother. It's not just a traditional expectation. It carries legal weight. And because of that, the verification process around a royal birth has always been taken seriously. Now, when records are unclear, when timelines don't match up publicly, and when the usual steps aren't visibly followed, that rule becomes the lens through which people start examining the situation. Not because anyone has definitive proof of anything, but because the absence of clarity in a system built entirely on documented clarity naturally pulls attention to exactly these kinds of questions. And here's the part that's worth sitting with. Harry and Meghan made a very deliberate choice to step away from a lot of royal protocols. That was their right. They've been open about wanting to do things differently, on their own terms. But the challenge with that position is that opting out of tradition in a system that runs on tradition doesn't make the questions disappear. It actually amplifies them. Because when the expected process isn't followed and no alternative explanation is clearly offered, people don't just move on. They start filling in the blanks themselves. That's not unique to royals or to this story. It's just human nature. Uncertainty creates speculation. And the more controlled the environment around that uncertainty, the more intense the speculation gets. What made this particular situation stick, though, wasn't just the missing documentation or the timeline confusion. It was what came after. Because instead of clearing things up, even in a general, non-invasive way. The response from Harry and Meghan's side was to pull back further, tighten the circle, control the image even more carefully.
A very healthy boy. Mother and baby are doing incredibly well. It's been...
And that pattern, as we'll get into, didn't stop with the birth. If you want to understand just how different Harry and Meghan's approach is compared to the rest of the royal family, you don't need to read any reports or dig through any investigations. You just have to look at the photos, take William and Kate's children, George, Charlotte, Louis. You've seen them at Trooping the Color. You've seen them laughing on the steps of a church, fidgeting during balcony appearances, being kids in front of cameras they've grown up around. There's a naturalness to it, an ease. Even when it's clearly a formal occasion, they feel like a real family living a real life within an extraordinary situation. You get a sense of who they are as people, even at their age. Now look at how Archie and Lilibet have been presented to the world. The photos are rare. When they do appear, they're carefully selected, angles controlled. In some cases, faces not even fully visible. And the settings are always managed. Never a candid, never an unguarded moment, never something that feels accidental. Every single image that reaches the public has clearly been reviewed, approved, and released with intention. Now, the argument Harry and Meghan have made publicly is that they want to protect their children. And on a human level, that's understandable. Growing up under a media microscope is genuinely difficult, and wanting to shield your kids from that pressure is something most parents would relate to. But there's a difference between protecting your children and curating their existence for public consumption. And what we're seeing with Archie and Lilibet looks much more like the latter.
He's put more of a target on his children's backs when it comes to the media and the paparazzi because of these silly games.
Because protection would mean keeping them out of the public eye entirely. But that's not what's happening. They do appear strategically at moments that serve a specific narrative, carefully framed, never accidental. It's not privacy, it's selective visibility. And selective visibility, when it's this consistent and this controlled, starts functioning less like a parenting choice and more like a PR move. That distinction matters, because it shapes how people perceive everything else around it. When the image of your family is being managed this carefully, it makes people wonder what the unmanaged version looks like. And when you combine that with the questions already circulating about birth timelines and documentation, the controlled photo rollout stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like part of a larger pattern. There's also the family connection piece that gets overlooked in this conversation. George, Charlotte, and Louis have a relationship with their extended family that plays out somewhat publicly. You see the interactions, you get a sense of those bonds existing in real life, not just on paper. With Archie and Lilibet, that's almost entirely absent. The relationship with King Charles, with their cousins, with the wider family structure, it's either very limited or completely hidden from view. And whether that's by choice or by circumstance, the effect is the same.
Makes it clear that these pictures were at the very least digitally manipulated.
Two children growing up at a distance from the family they technically belong to. That distance, as it turns out, isn't just visible in the photos. It runs through almost every part of how Harry and Meghan have built their life in California. And that life, it's becoming increasingly clear, comes with its own set of very complicated pressures. Montecito is not a modest choice. It's one of the most expensive zip codes in the United States, a quiet enclave of old money and serious wealth tucked along the California coast. The kind of place where the houses don't have price tags, because if you need to ask, you probably can't afford it. And Harry and Meghan didn't just move there. They built a life there. A large, security-heavy, staff-supported life that by any reasonable estimate costs an extraordinary amount of money to maintain every single month. Which raises an obvious question. Where is it all coming from? At the start, the answer seemed clear enough. The Netflix deal was massive. The Spotify deal came with serious money attached to it as well. The book advance for Spare was one of the largest ever handed to a public figure. On paper, they had built exactly the kind of financial independence they said they were going for when they stepped away from royal duties. Self-sufficient, untethered, free. But things haven't stayed that clean. Spotify didn't just quietly let the contract expire. The split was public and it was pointed. The word grifters, used by a senior figure at the company in reference to Harry and Meghan, wasn't a throwaway comment. That kind of language, coming from inside one of the world's biggest entertainment platforms, lands differently than a bad review. It signals that the relationship broke down not just commercially, but reputationally.
Ambitions, however, behind the scenes, tensions were growing, guys, between the Duchess and Netflix before.
And in an industry where your next deal depends entirely on how the last one ended, that matters enormously. Netflix is still in the picture, but the pressure there is real. Streaming platforms don't hand out large contracts out of goodwill. They expect returns. They expect content that pulls viewers, drives subscriptions, justifies the spend. And the challenge Harry and Meghan face is that their most commercially viable subject matter is the very thing they claimed to be walking away from: the royal family, the drama, the behind-the-scenes tension. The moment they lean too far into that, they're back in the cycle they said they wanted to escape. But if they move away from it entirely, the audience interest drops sharply. It's a trap with no clean exit. Speaking circuit has been another avenue, but that's hitting its own turbulence. High-ticket engagements, international tours, appearances marketed around their story and their brand, but the reception hasn't always matched the expectation. In certain markets, Australia being a notable example, the response has been more skeptical than celebratory. People aren't showing up with open arms the way they might have a few years ago. The questions being asked in those rooms are sharper now. What exactly is the value being offered here?
Is thirsty, as the kids say.
Thirsty. Well, thirsty/desperate.
What's real and what's performance. And that shift in public appetite is significant because their entire income model is reputation dependent. Unlike a traditional business that can absorb a few bad quarters and restructure, their product is essentially themselves. Their story, their image. The moment that image starts feeling hollow or inconsistent, the financial engine behind it starts stalling, which is where the real irony of this whole situation becomes impossible to ignore. The man who left the royal family to escape the pressure of public scrutiny now needs that scrutiny to survive financially. And that contradiction is starting to show. There's a version of Harry that people who followed him closely in his earlier years remember very fondly. Not the prince, not the royal, just Harry. The guy who was genuinely at ease around his military friends, who could disappear into a group of people who had no interest in his title and everything interest in the person underneath it. Those relationships were real in a way that's actually quite rare for someone in his position. They weren't built on access or opportunity. They were built on shared experience, shared hardship, the kind of bond that forms when you've been through something genuinely difficult together. That circle is largely gone now. It didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, a move across an ocean, a very public separation from the institution that connected him to a lot of those people. A new life built around an entirely different set of priorities.
Harry and Meghan have been married for 8 years.
It's not even a milestone yet. It was their 10-year anniversary, 20.
And the circle that replaced it looks nothing like the one it replaced. What surrounds Harry now, reportedly, is a world of PR strategists, media advisors, brand consultants, and celebrity connections. People whose relationship with him is professional at its core, even when it presents itself as personal. And that distinction matters more than it might seem on the surface. When your inner circle is made up of people whose livelihood is connected to your image, the feedback you receive is never fully neutral. A PR advisor isn't going to tell you that a decision looks bad if their job depends on making it look good. A media strategist isn't going to push back on a narrative they helped construct. The incentive structure of those relationships points in one direction: protect the brand, maintain the story, keep the machine running, which means the honest, uncomfortable conversations that real friendships provide simply don't happen the same way. What you end up with is a bubble, and bubbles, by definition, distort reality. Inside one, everything feels more reasonable than it actually is. Decisions that might look questionable from the outside feel entirely justified from within because everyone around you is either nodding along or staying quiet. There's no friction. No one saying, hey, have you thought about how this looks? No one offering a perspective.
Lines just keep on coming as Meghan once again uses Archie and Lily for clicks to boost her brand.
Doesn't already align with the current direction. And there are reports suggesting that Harry has felt the weight of this more than he lets on publicly. That he's become increasingly consumed by what's being said about them online, constantly reading commentary, tracking coverage, getting pulled deeper into the noise rather than further away from it. Which is a painful irony when you consider that escaping media pressure was the entire stated reason for leaving in the first place. The people who used to keep him grounded aren't in the room anymore. And the people who are in the room have a vested interest in keeping things exactly as they are. That's not a support system. That's a management structure. And there's a significant difference between the two, especially when things start getting complicated. Because when the questions get harder, when the scrutiny intensifies, when the pressure builds, what you need around you is honesty. Raw, unfiltered, sometimes uncomfortable honesty. And right now, it's not clear that Harry has easy access to that, which goes a long way toward explaining what comes next. At some point, someone in Harry and Meghan's camp made a strategic decision. When questions get too loud, when a narrative starts gaining traction that they don't like, the move isn't to address it. The move is to shut it down. Legal notices, formal warnings, cease and desist letters sent to media outlets and individuals who push too hard on certain topics. It's a tool that powerful people have always used, and on the surface, it makes a certain kind of sense.
We expect of a C-list venal celebrity rather than an A-list regal duchess. But
control the information, limit the spread, protect the story. But here's the problem, it's not working, and in many ways, it's actively making things worse. There's a well-documented phenomenon that anyone who has spent time studying media and public perception understands instinctively. When you try to legally suppress a story, you don't kill it, you amplify it. The act of pushing back with that kind of force signals to everyone watching that there's something worth pushing back against. It turns a rumor into a headline. It turns a question into an investigation. And it transforms casual curiosity into something much more determined. Every time a legal warning goes out around questions related to the children, the birth timeline, or the documentation gaps, the response from the people asking those questions isn't to back down. It's to dig deeper. Because in their minds, and honestly, in the minds of a lot of neutral observers, the intensity of the legal response is disproportionate to what a straightforward situation would require. If the answers are simple, why does defending them require this much firepower? That's the perception problem. And perception in this kind of situation is almost as powerful as reality. What makes it even more complicated is the timing pattern. The legal pressure tends to arrive specifically around certain subjects: the kids, the birth, the documentation. Not uniformly across all criticism, not in response to every unflattering story. Selectively.
View Meghan and Harry have and gave them public titles, so therefore they have a responsibility to.
And that selectivity tells its own story. It signals that there are particular areas considered sensitive enough to warrant an aggressive response, which naturally makes those exact areas the ones people focus on most intensely. Meghan, by most accounts, has been the more decisive force behind this approach. When things escalate, the response is swift and it's legal. And while that might reflect a genuine desire to protect her family, the execution has consistently produced the opposite of the intended effect. Short term, it creates the appearance of control. Medium term, it creates the appearance of something worth controlling. And long term, it chips away at the one thing that no legal letter can rebuild once it's gone: credibility. Because the audience watching all of this isn't stupid. They understand the difference between a public figure protecting their privacy and a public figure protecting a narrative.
And we know that.
And the more the response to scrutiny looks like the latter, the harder it becomes to convince anyone it's the former. The frustrating part from the outside looking in is that None of this needed to get this complicated. A single moment of genuine transparency. Not a produced documentary, not a carefully worded statement, but something real and unguarded could have shifted the entire conversation. But that moment hasn't come, and its absence at this point speaks louder than anything that has. King Charles has said very little publicly about any of this. William, even less. And if you're looking for a joint appearance, a warm family moment, some visible sign that the bridges haven't fully burned, you're not finding it. The distance between Harry and Meghan and the core of the royal family isn't just geographical, it's structural.
Uh-oh, Harry. Funds are so tight. Meghan Markle's going out to the press telling everybody she's the breadwinner.
And from everything being reported, it wasn't arrived at accidentally. It was chosen deliberately. To understand why, you have to understand what the monarchy actually is at its core. It's not just a family, it's an institution. One of the oldest and most scrutinized institutions in the world, built entirely on the foundations of tradition, documented history, and public trust. Every decision made at that level isn't purely personal. It carries institutional weight. And when something threatens the stability of that institution, the response isn't emotional. It's calculated. That's the lens through which Charles and William are reportedly viewing this entire situation, not as a family dispute that needs to be resolved over a dinner table, but as a potential institutional risk that needs to be carefully managed from a distance. And the way you manage that kind of risk when you're the monarchy is by creating separation. Visible, undeniable, impossible to misread separation. Because here's what's at stake for them. If there are unresolved questions around documentation, lineage, or the legitimacy of certain claims, and reportedly there are people asking exactly those questions in serious circles, the worst thing the monarchy can do is get pulled into that conversation without having clear answers.
2019. And this was surrounded by controversy, largely to the unconventional decisions Prince Harry and
Every system the monarchy runs on demands clarity around exactly these kinds of issues. The line of succession isn't a casual concept. It's the structural backbone of the entire institution. And you don't casually wade into questions about it without being absolutely certain of what you're walking into. So what you're seeing from Charles and William isn't coldness for the sake of it. It's a very deliberate decision to keep the core of the monarchy clean and separate from anything that carries unresolved questions. Let the situation exist. Don't react to it publicly. Don't validate the questions by engaging with them. And absolutely don't create any visual or symbolic connection that could later be used to suggest the institution endorsed something it didn't fully understand. The result is this strange, uncomfortable in-between space that Harry and Meghan now occupy. They're still technically members of the royal family. The titles haven't been formally stripped. The connection still exists on paper. But in every practical sense, in terms of access, presence, inclusion, and visible family bonds, they're outside of it, existing in a kind of gray zone that has no clear precedent and no obvious resolution. And that gray zone has consequences that go beyond PR and public opinion. It affects how they're perceived by institutions, by potential partners, by anyone evaluating their long-term credibility. Because being simultaneously connected to and excluded from the most documented family in the world creates a contradictory image.
But they spent the last 5 years writing books, sort of going through the tumultuous, horrible...
That's very difficult to build anything stable on top of. For Harry especially, that position must carry a particular weight because unlike Meghan, he didn't come from outside the institution. He was born into it. It was his identity long before it became complicated. And losing that sense of belonging, even if the leaving was voluntary, is not a small thing. Before Harry was ever part of the picture, Meghan Markle was already moving through a very specific kind of world. Toronto, where she was based during her years on Suits, wasn't just a filming location. It was a networking environment. And the circles she was operating in during that period weren't casual Hollywood hangouts. They were deliberate, connected, influence-aware spaces, Soho House events, high-level industry gatherings. Rooms full of people who understood exactly how media positioning worked and why it mattered. That's not a criticism on its own. Ambitious people build ambitious networks. That's how the world works. But it becomes relevant context when you look at everything that followed, because the infrastructure that was quietly being built during those Toronto years.
Bit of cash. This is Meghan Markle. She's been out posing in a t-shirt with an 87.
Looks remarkably similar to the infrastructure that powered the transition out of royal life. Think about the smoothness of it. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from their royal duties in early 2020, the conventional expectation was that they'd spend some time figuring out their next move. That's what most people do after a major life upheaval. But that's not what happened. Within a relatively short window, they had a Netflix deal, a Spotify deal, a book deal, a production company, a charitable foundation, and a full media strategy in place. That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't happen without prior relationships, prior conversations, prior groundwork being laid well before the announcement was ever made. And when you look at the people around Meghan now, the advisors, the strategists, the media-connected figures shaping their public approach, they're not unfamiliar types. They're cut from the same cloth as the people who surrounded her in those pre-Harry years. The same understanding of leverage, the same instinct for narrative control, the same awareness of how image translates into opportunity, which leads to a question that more people are reportedly starting to ask seriously. Was the decision to leave royal life as spontaneous as it was presented?
Ambitious for the role of Duchess? And was the royal resignation a shared desire, or did Harry simply not have a choice?
Or had the architecture for what came after been in development for considerably longer than the public timeline suggests? Now, to be clear, there's no definitive answer to that question. What exists is a pattern that invites it, a pattern of preparedness that sits awkwardly alongside the narrative of two overwhelmed people simply seeking peace. Because peace doesn't typically come pre-packaged with 9-figure entertainment deals and a fully operational media company. What it suggests, at minimum, is that Meghan entered the royal world with a level of strategic awareness that went well beyond what was visible on the surface, and that the transition out of it was managed with the same level of precision that had reportedly characterized her career moves long before she became a duchess. The uncomfortable part of that picture isn't the ambition. Ambition is human. The uncomfortable part is the gap between the story that was told publicly and the mechanics of what was apparently already in motion. Because when those two things don't fully line up, it raises a broader question about authenticity, about how much of what has been presented as genuine, spontaneous, and emotional was actually planned, calculated, and ready to execute. And that question, once it takes root, has a way of recoloring everything that came before it. Somewhere in all of this, it's worth pausing on the two people who never got a choice in any of it. Archie and Lilibet didn't decide to leave the UK. They didn't choose Montecito over Windsor. They didn't opt into the controlled photo rollouts or the carefully managed public appearances or the distance from cousins they barely know. They were born into a situation already in motion.
Well, and whatnot. And guess what happened? They never followed up. And
shaped by decisions made long before they were old enough to understand what any of it meant. And the life they're growing up in, however comfortable and however well-intentioned, is a curated one, structured, contained, far from the broader family network that royal children typically grow up embedded in. No shared birthday parties with George and Charlotte. No casual visits to King Charles. No sense of belonging to a larger family story that extends beyond their parents' very specific and very pressurized version of it. Whether that was done out of genuine protection or out of something more strategic, the effect on those children is the same: distance. And distance has a long memory. For Harry and Meghan, the broader picture now is one of compounding pressure, financially, reputationally, relationally. The deals that were supposed to create freedom have created their own set of obligations. The silence that was supposed to protect them has created its own set of questions. The distance from the royal family that was supposed to bring peace has created its own kind of instability. Every solution they reached for has come with a hidden cost that's now becoming visible. And the core tension at the center of all of it hasn't moved. It's the same tension it's always been. Control versus clarity. They have leaned heavily into control of their image, their narrative, their children's visibility, the information that reaches the public about their lives. And that control has not brought the stability it was supposed to bring.
Delicious. The Duchess sharing a rare look at her family. Here's 6-year-old Archie and 4-year-old Lilibet watching mom do.
If anything, it has done the opposite. Because in the age we're living in, where records are searchable and timelines are verifiable and people with genuine investigative skills are paying close attention, sustained control without underlying clarity doesn't hold. It cracks. Slowly at first, then all at once. The path toward clarity has always been available. It still is. One genuinely unguarded moment, one consistent and verifiable timeline, one visible, natural interaction with the family they reportedly still want to be connected to. Not a produced documentary, not a statement filtered through a PR team. Something real, something that doesn't require management to land correctly. That kind of transparency wouldn't fix everything overnight, but it would fundamentally change the conversation. It would give people something solid to hold on to instead of gaps to fill in. But that moment keeps not coming. And every week it doesn't. The story grows another layer. The questions get sharper. The scrutiny gets more structured. The credibility gap gets wider. At this point, this story has moved well beyond celebrity gossip or royal drama. It's become something more fundamental, a question about trust, about the gap between the life that's been presented.
Is affecting the relationship. Do you know anything about that?
You hear different. And the life that actually exists. And that kind of question, once it becomes the main story, has a way of refusing to be replaced by anything else. The longer the silence holds, the louder it gets. So here's where we actually are. A couple who left one of the most powerful institutions in the world, promising authenticity, promising realness, promising a life lived on their own honest terms. And yet the longer this story runs, the more it becomes defined not by what they've shown, but by what they haven't. The gaps in the timeline, the missing transparency, the legal walls around questions that a straightforward situation wouldn't need legal walls around. The carefully managed images of children who deserve to just be children. The distance from a family that, whatever its flaws, is still theirs. None of this is simple, and anyone who tells you it is selling you something. There are real human beings at the center of this. People under genuine pressure, navigating something that has no clean roadmap. That deserves acknowledgement. But acknowledgement doesn't mean the questions disappear. It just means we hold them with a little more nuance than the loudest voices on either side tend to allow. Because at the end of this, the thing that lingers isn't the drama. It's the unanswered question underneath all of it. Not about titles or money or Netflix deals, but about something much simpler. Is what we're being shown real? And if it is, why does proving it require this much effort? That's the question that won't go away. And until it gets a real answer, this story isn't going anywhere either. If this video made you think differently about any part of this situation, drop it in the comments. Not the hot takes, the actual thoughts, the parts that stuck with you, the parts you disagree with, the things you want to know more about. That conversation is worth having. And if you're new here and this is the kind of content that interests you, the stories behind the stories, the patterns that don't make the headlines, then stick around. There's a lot more where this came from. Subscribe and you won't miss what's coming next.